James Carter was a man who believed in hard work and kindness. He grew up in a tight-knit community where everyone knew and looked out for each other. He carried those values with him wherever he went. That evening, James was excited because he had just closed a big deal at work. To celebrate, he decided to treat himself to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, a place he had always wanted to visit but never had the chance. As James approached the restaurant, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the bustling city streets. The restaurant was packed, filled with well-dressed patrons laughing and enjoying their evening. James felt a sense of pride as he stepped through the doors, his suit freshly pressed and his shoes polished to a shine. He had worked hard to get to where he was, and tonight, he wanted to celebrate that achievement. But as soon as he approached the hostess stand, he noticed something was off. The hostess, a young woman with a polite but rigid smile, glanced at him and then quickly looked away, as if hoping he would just disappear. James didn't let it bother him. He knew that sometimes people had bad days, and he wasn't about to let a small hiccup ruin his evening. "Good evening," James said with his usual warm smile. "I have a reservation under the name Carter." The hostess hesitated for a moment before looking down at her reservation book. She flipped through the pages with exaggerated slowness, and James could feel the stares of other patrons behind him. His smile wavered slightly, but he kept his composure. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your reservation here," the hostess finally said, not meeting his eyes. James felt a pang of confusion. He had made the reservation himself just the day before, and had even called earlier that day to confirm. "Are you sure? I spoke to someone on the phone who confirmed it was all set." The hostess glanced around nervously before leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "We're fully booked for the evening, sir. There's nothing I can do." James glanced around the restaurant. He could see several empty tables, and he knew something wasn't right. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. "There are empty tables right there," he said, gesturing subtly with his hand. "I just want to have a nice dinner. I'm sure there must be some mistake." The hostess's face flushed, and she glanced over at a manager standing nearby. The manager, a tall, stern-looking man, shook his head almost imperceptibly. James caught the gesture and felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't a mistake. They just didn't want him there. A quiet tension filled the air as the hostess stammered out another apology. James felt his hands clench at his sides, but he forced himself to relax. He didn't want to cause a scene. That wouldn't help anything. He looked at the people seated around the restaurant, some of whom were now openly staring at him. He could feel their judgment, their silent questions about why he thought he deserved to be there. He took a step back, his heart heavy with a mix of sadness and anger. He had been in situations like this before, where he was made to feel like he didn't belong, like he was somehow less deserving because of the color of his skin. But he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him get angry. Just as he was about to turn and leave, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you leaving?" James turned to see a young girl, no older than 10, standing with her mother at a nearby table. Her eyes were wide with curiosity and concern. Her mother looked horrified, her face flushed as she tried to pull her daughter back, but the little girl stood her ground. James crouched down to her level, his expression softening. "Yes, sweetheart. It seems they don't have a table for me tonight." The little girl frowned, her small face scrunched up in confusion. "But why? There are so many empty tables." James glanced at the hostess, who was now looking anywhere but at him. He turned back to the girl and smiled gently. "Sometimes, things don't always make sense, but it's okay. I'm going to find another place to eat." The girl's mother stepped forward, her voice shaky as she apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for her to bother you." James shook his head. "She's not bothering me at all. She's just asking questions." He looked back at the little girl. It's important to always ask questions, to try and understand why things happen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. "Here," he said, handing them to the mother. "Please let your daughter have a dessert on me." The mother looked stunned, her eyes welling up with tears as she took the money. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that." James stood up, his heart heavy, but his spirit unbroken. "Kindness is something we all deserve," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. As he turned to leave, he noticed that the entire restaurant had gone silent. People were staring at him, but the expressions on their faces had changed. There was no more judgment, only shame and, for some, a hint of admiration. As James walked out the door, he felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He was hurt, yes, but he also felt a strange sense of peace. He had chosen not to let their prejudice define him. He had shown them the power of kindness in the face of hate. The next day, James was back at work, trying to put the incident behind him, but his phone kept buzzing with messages and notifications. Confused, he opened one of them and saw a link to a video. Someone had recorded the entire incident at the restaurant and posted it online. The video had gone viral overnight, with thousands of people commenting on his grace and dignity. Messages of support poured in from all over the world. People were inspired by his ability to remain calm and compassionate, even in the face of blatant discrimination. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, James found himself at the center of a national conversation about race, kindness, and the power of choosing love over hate. The restaurant, now facing a wave of backlash, issued a public apology and invited James back for a complimentary meal. But he declined. It wasn't about the food. It was about respect and dignity. A few days later, James received a letter in the mail. It was from the young girl's mother. She thanked him for his kindness and shared how her daughter had been deeply affected by what she had witnessed. "She's been talking about you nonstop," the letter read. "She says she wants to be like you when she grows up, kind and brave. Thank you for showing her what true strength looks like." James felt tears prick at his eyes as he read the letter. He knew that change didn't happen overnight, but it started with small acts of courage and kindness. He hadn't set out to make a statement that night, but his actions had resonated far beyond that restaurant. They had shown that, even in the face of discrimination, one person's grace could inspire many. The story of James Carter became a reminder to everyone that it's not about how others treat you, but how you choose to respond. And sometimes, the greatest act of resistance is simply to be kind. As he folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, James smiled. He knew that the road to change was long and winding, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time.